Robinhood just gave retail investors access to 80 Y Combinator seed stage startup companies, the same startups that produced Airbnb, Stripe, Coinbase, and DoorDash. No accreditation required, no minimum investments, $25 a share, and it sounds like a wealth creation democratization story of the decade. And there's a genuine case to really be made for it. But of course, there are 4 specific things that the market is not telling you. And before requesting those IPO shares over on Robinhood, and the window does close August 12th, so it is very short-lived. You need to understand before you click. Today, I want to give you the full picture because I got a lot of questions about this. So let's go ahead and get into it. When we start looking at the RV II, this is the Robinhood Venture Fund II. It is a business development company, or BDC. A BDC is a closed-ended fund created by Congress in 1980 to channel retail capital into private companies. It issues a fixed number of shares that trade on the stock exchange. In this case, it is the New York Stock Exchange, which is going to be listed August 13th under the ticker symbol RVII. Here's what you're actually buying. When you buy shares of RVII at $25, you are not buying equity in 80 startups. You are buying part of a share of a fund that owns stake in those 80 companies. These companies are at the very early stages of production. Most of them are at the seed stage where money is just getting started. Linked to the Y Combinator, the startup accelerator fund that has over 5,000 companies and produced since 2005. Now, this fund holds stake in those companies directly or through a special purchase vehicle, which we've seen before, separate legal entities which add another structure of layer between you and the actual asset that you're buying. The closed-ended structure of this is the most important structural fact to understand. Unlike an index fund, unlike an ETF, where you redeem the shares directly from the fund at a net value, a closed-ended fund issues that certain number of shares and does not allow direct redemption. If you want to exit the RVII, you sell your shares on the New York Stock Exchange at whatever price other buyers are willing to pay that day for it. This can be done at or above or even below the price that is of the underlying asset. When Robinhood's Venture Fund I, the predecessor that IPO'd at $25 on March of 2026, the shares opened at $22 at the first day of trading. Not a crash, not a market panic, just the normal dynamic where a closed-end fund's market price diverges from the actual net asset value because of supply and demand on the open market, and that really is what determines the price. Now, of course, there are 4 things we want to talk about when it comes to this, because this is when you really get into and how it works. So thing number 1, the fees are the highest in the ETF world by a wide margin. When you look at the RVII, it charges a 2% annual management fee on a net assets and a 20% incentive fee on realized capital gains, a structure that is known as the 2 and 20. This is identical to what hedge funds charges and this fee structure that institutional investors have spent decades fighting to reduce, precisely because it gives you a really big drag on your long-term returns. For context, when we look at a VOO, it is a 0.03, QQQM, which is a 0.15, even the QTM charges a 0.4. When you start looking at the RVII, it charges 2% plus 20% of gains. That 2% annual fee alone on the 200 million fund that they're looking to generate is a $4 million per year in management fees, even if that fund performs exceptionally well or it performs poorly. In addition, the 20% incentive fee means that every $100 of capital the fund generates, Robinhood Ventures are going to keep $20 of it before you ever see a profit. You need to significantly outperform just to justify the fee structure itself in relationship to any diversified ETF. Part number 2, the valuations are not set by the market. Every holding inside the RVII is a private company. Private companies do not have a stock price that updates every second on the stock exchange. Their valuations are classified as level 3 assets, meaning they are calculated by models, comparable transactions, and judgment by Robinhood Ventures itself, rather than observing by market prices. As of March 31st of 2026, Robinhood Ventures Fund I held 48.3% of its assets in that level 3 position. That means the fund's stated net asset value and the number that appears on the screen is really not true to the investment's actual worth. It is not the price that is agreed upon. It is an estimate that Robinhood Ventures is giving you, produced by its own methodology. Level 3 evaluations can be revised materially and either direction, up or down, depending on market conditions. A company that values a fund at, let's say, 50 million could reevaluate that fund at 20 million the next quarter using assessment without any shares of the company actually ever trading hands. Now, of course, thing number 3, and this is the big one, a majority of startups will fail and have failed. This is not criticism of the RVII. It is a mathematical fact that early stage investment companies, historically even the seed stage startups, do fail. This is approximately 90%, which is crazy. When you start looking at the Y Combinator companies, they have a much better survival rate. It is a program that they built and developed to really get these startups off the ground. But the fundamental economics of venture capital are built by the power law, a small number of extreme winners produced to really cover the losses and the generating the funds total return. So if you have some companies that are really breaking out within this fund, it can actually carry the entire fund. When professional venture capitalists invest in the seed stage, they're counting on 1 or 2 of these companies to be the next Airbnb, to be the next Stripe, to justify the entire portfolio's existence. That is the bet you're making when you buy this at $25 a share. Not a bet that 80 companies are going to succeed. You're betting that 2 or 3 of these companies are going to generate enough income. It is a legitimate bet to carry this entire portfolio. And then, of course, thing number 4, there is no dividend and there may not be liquidity, which again scares the heck out of me. When you look at the RVII prospectus, it explicitly states there is no expectation of regular quarterly dividends. Traditionally, the BDCs that lend money to small or mid-cap companies pay regular dividends from the interest income on those loans. This is not looking to lend money. It takes equity into the startups. It is not profitable, and they are not paying dividends on here. The income that you might expect from a regular BDC is not going to apply here. While these shares will theoretically trade on the New York Stock Exchange, a market will only exist if there are buyers for these shares. If retail interest in the RVII cools, when it does, when an IPO novelty really fades, the bid-ask could significantly widen, and selling your position at a price shown on the screen might be a lot harder than it was to actually buy into this position. Now, I want to be fair when it comes to the RVII because the access story is genuinely real. Seed stage startup equity has historically been exclusively given to institutional investors, accredited individuals with a very high net worth, or employee stock options that they had, just like we've seen with SpaceX. When you start looking at the companies that came from the Y Combinator alumni network, we are looking at Airbnb, Stripe, Coinbase, DoorDash, Dropbox, Reddit. It is one of the most concentrated sources of transformational companies that we've seen in history. Getting retail exposure is the next generation of YC companies before they're going public is a legitimate wealth creation thesis that didn't exist 2 years ago until Robinhood actually brought it. The case for this exists in a very specific investor. This is someone who understands that the venture capital power law, expecting that 90% of the companies in there are likely going to fail, and has a long time horizon that can be measured in decades or even in years, not just months, and also has their foundation already built with ETFs, looking at the VOO, the SPMO, even the QQQM, knowing that there is a core allocation within the portfolio, and putting 1 to 3% of a total portfolio in here at a very early stage private market exposure, because if investors are using this correctly, the hedge fund fees are painful, but the price in the asset class could be there. Now, looking at 1 to 3% of a well-built, well-developed portfolio, the fee drag is manageable, and the upside potential for this is very, very real. Now, of course, what investors is this completely wrong for? Anyone who is treating it as one income product, because honestly, there is none. When we start looking at the QQQM or the VOO, if you don't have allocation, if you don't have a core ETF that is already in place, or really looking to hold it for a much shorter term, let's say another 1 to 2 years, the market fluctuation with some of these level 3 valuations might really not be for you. So here's the big picture, guys. The RVII is a genuine, innovative in access to those private markets. The story for these companies are real. It is also a closed-ended BDC charging hedge fund fees on a level 3 asset where most of the underlying companies are going to fail. Shares of this could also trade below the NAV from day one as Fund 1 did. We've seen a pullback and it has never recovered at this point. Both of those things could be true simultaneously. The question is whether you're the right investor for both the opportunity and the risk that this is going to take. Apply the same test that we used in the K video on Wednesday. If you cannot explain in one sentence how this is going to generate a return, you cannot risk your money in this and really make it a possibility. The answer for the RVII, it generates a return if 2 or 3 of the 80 seed startup companies become generational companies. The gains from those winners can outperform that 2% annual fee and that 20% carryover multi-year holding period. And if you have a chance to sell those on the New York Stock Exchange at a price close to NAV, you may want to exit it at the point if we do see a really big increase. It is the honest answer in just one single sentence. If you're comfortable with all 3 of those decisions, go ahead and invest in it. If any of them gave you pause, then the standard ETFs we talk about are going to be the ones that you want to invest in. Drop a comment down below. Are you requesting the RVII IPO shares before August 12th? And if you are, tell me exactly what percent of that portfolio you're going to be putting into this. If you're passing, tell me why, because both of the answers are the right answer, because it is for very different investors. Now, I read every single comment. I will reply to them all. Subscribe if I gave you a picture, more about this IPO window that we have. And of course, I'll see you tomorrow.